Welcome to Accountable, where your business is our business. Hosted by David R. Peters. Today's guest is Corey Edmonds.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to Accountable, the podcast for CFOs by a CFO. Hey, my name's Dave. Thanks so much for being here. One of the terms that has become a part of our vocabulary in more recent months is this term, the Great Resignation. And what that term refers to is this idea that there's just a lot of people changing jobs right now. There's just a lot of activity in the job market. You know, during the pandemic, people were struggling. They were struggling to make ends meet. And so I think you saw a lot of people that were scared to move. They were scared to try and test the job market just because they just with everything going on, with money being tight, with the economy not doing very well, they were just scared to move. And now things seemingly have opened up a little bit, and now people are looking to explore greener pastures. They're looking to do things like maybe start their own business, or they might be just exploring other job opportunities, maybe within their industry or maybe in another industry altogether. The bottom line, though, is for employers, this is creating a little bit of chaos. It's causing employers who are trying to hire to do some things that maybe they haven't before. Some employers are offering signing bonuses that maybe they haven't had to do in the past, and it's just creating a situation that is just taking a lot of employers a little bit out of their comfort zone. So today we wanted to talk about current events. We wanted to talk about this idea of the Great Resignation with somebody who has been experiencing this firsthand. And so today, my guest is Corey Edmonds. Corey is the managing partner at TalentSource360. He has been a recruiter in the Washington, D.C. area for about 18 years. And so Corey's really seen this firsthand. I mean, he has specialized in trying to hook up clients that were looking for jobs and employers that were looking to attract talent in the finance and accounting world. And so Corey is a great person to be talking about this because he specializes in the accounting and finance industry, and he's seeing this firsthand. He's also experienced a lot over his 18 years, so we're going to talk to him about what is so different about now as compared to other times in our past. Like, what is the difference between now and when we went through the financial crisis? What is so different, and why are we reacting so differently during this current time? So hopefully this conversation is going to help us maybe shed some light on some of the things that are going on right now, and maybe provide some tips for some employers that are trying to get good talent during this very unique time in our history. So enjoy my conversation today with Corey Edmonds. My guest this week on Accountable is Corey Edmonds. Corey, welcome to Accountable.
Thanks. Thank you for having me. Great to be here.
So, Corey, the big term that we keep hearing in the media and in our industry, and it seems to be sort of it's become almost like a catchphrase almost, is this Great Resignation. The Great Resignation sounds big. What in the world is this? How did we get here? And just tell us what in the world we're talking about when we say the Great Resignation.
Sure. Well, I think in order to understand the Great Resignation, you do have to understand how we got here. So I definitely appreciate that question and how you phrase that. You know, prior to the pandemic, we had 10 straight years of market improvement and therefore unemployment improvement. You know, we dropped from 10% to 3% on the unemployment line, and that was due to confidence in employers, a lot of hiring that was going on, and then those employers, of course, paying strongly. Bonuses were being paid out in full, salaries were on the rise. People were staying put in their roles in a lot of cases. And all the while, of course, workload was increasing and stress levels were going up, and then COVID arrives, and the pandemic ensues, and I think we can all relate that that was a rocky start for most. Many sectors were hit hard financially. Some sectors may not have been hit as hard, but they still had to muddle through quite a few challenges getting into things. I mean, regardless of the industry, you had to adjust and manage your business in this new virtual world.
Right.
And I think most firms figured it out, but they spent the last year in this virtual state, embracing, the good and the bad. The good, of course, for employees being, no one's commuting anymore, and more family time and extended lunch breaks, and you name it. There and less office politics. Maybe there's a hidden gem there, but it was still a stressful year. Yeah. And I think, parents had to deal with virtual schooling. COVID anxiety was still looming. Everybody had to learn how to work in this virtual world. And, that is the past that kind of brought us up to where we are today, sort of post-pandemic. And where do we go from here?
So this is basically coming off of the pandemic. Okay. So a lot of this sort of, I guess, I don't even know what the word is, nervousness, just this wanting to jump, feeling is coming off of the pandemic. But I mean, is it really just that like people were scared to move during the pandemic, and now it's like, okay, we rightly or wrongly, we feel like things are better now. Okay. I mean, I think in some cases it's probably maybe still a little bit iffy. I think some people are maybe feeling a little bit unsure of themselves even still. But is that what it is? Is this just like, hey, we were scared to move before, but now that we got the opportunity to move, let's do it?
It's going to sound a bit cliche, but it's a bit of a perfect storm. I mean, we've otherwise shifted in the workplace what would probably normally take place over a generation. Right. And we've done it in a year and a half. Yeah. And I mean, now here we are at kind of the culmination of things post-pandemic in some ways. Companies are ready to find their new normal. Employees, they think they've already found their new normal because they've been enjoying the fruits of this virtual world for the last year once they got used to it. Right. And then this, what I call peer pressure, and that's peer pressure on the company, on the employer side, as well as on the employee side, as the remote play sort of works out, and there's now legitimate options for employees to identify fully remote scenarios. And so all of this is sort of coming together, and I can unpack that first one a little bit in terms of companies taking this opportunity to decide what to do now. For the last year and a half, many of these firms have had expensive real estate that sat vacant. Yeah. And so they've got some overhead, and they're figuring out what to do with that. And it's leases that they may not be able to jump out of. Right. And then COVID, of course, the risk is reduced drastically. Vaccinations are becoming quite plentiful. And then the critical timing factor of this too, which we'll probably get into a little bit more, is Labor Day is here. Schools are opening, and kids are returning to school physically in many cases. Right. So that's where we're at from an employer standpoint, and why they're deciding now. And, on the employee side, the pandemic was stressful. Folks came into it already stressed out, and then had to work through that. And while they may enjoy this life that they've created now, they've overcome the headaches of getting set up in the virtual world. And they've also proven this argument true that I can be as productive remote as I am in the office. And that argument was looming well before the pandemic, but now we've actually proven it to many leaders out there.
I think that's an excellent point. I think, I distinctly remember having this conversation, with other executives, colleagues, and some of my peers about whether, whether somebody could be productive, whether or not they could really be managed too. I mean, remotely. I think that was something that people wonder. They say, well, if nobody's watching this person, and we can't see what they're doing, can they, are they going to do the job as well?
Yeah.
And I think you're right. I think in some ways, I think that this is, kind of proven to be true. What sort of makes now any different from other times? I mean, why could this be so drastic? Is it just because the pandemic was just so impactful? Or, I mean, there's been other times throughout our history where we've had sort of difficult, economic times. I mean, the financial crisis in 2008 kind of comes to mind. What makes this so drastic, I guess?
Well, one, I think that the market in some cases has returned with a vengeance, right? So it's improved to the extent that certain firms, certain sectors, certain industries have bounced back to pre-pandemic levels and continue to grow. Others have been able to, to benefit from some of the current changes to the environment as a whole and technology specifically. And so all of a sudden, there are definitely some greener pastures outside of someone's current employment. And so you couple that with the fact that, again, they were stressed coming into the pandemic. They were sort of stressed through the pandemic. And now their firm is stressing them out again with, hey, let's go back into the office here in the next couple of weeks and try to get back to normal.
So let me ask you this. So, I mean, your business is in the DC area. You mentioned that you recruit for accounting and finance positions, and what are some of the trends and things like that you have been seeing? Are there any sort of specific things that are kind of sticking out now that maybe haven't in the past?
Yeah, and I think some folks would say have been challenges for a while. Again, public accounting is one where recruitment has always been at the forefront, but certainly not a positive trend. But I would say from the employer standpoint, this struggle to hire in a virtual setting is still very much an issue. Identifying the talent, moving through their internal recruiting process is challenging. Balancing speed to hire with the collaborative process. And, in selling the organization, it's hard to sell the benefits of a corporate culture or the environment when you didn't have the luxury of walking that candidate, he or she, through your sexy new office space.
Right. I would also say, too, just as somebody who has worked in startups, as somebody who has been involved in the hiring process, when you're in startups, especially fast growing startups, you hire a lot of people. It's also, too, that, there's a part of hiring, and I'm not sure it's something that people really discuss a whole lot, but there's a gut feel to it. I mean, we evaluate candidates. We look at credentials. We look at, what they've done in the past. We've looked at, what they say to interview questions. But honestly, in some cases, it just comes down to gut feel. And I still wonder if maybe that's why we have trouble maybe hiring in a virtual environment is just we can't, when the person's not in the same room with you, it just makes it tougher to get. It just makes it tougher to sort of evaluate that person because you still feel kind of disconnected from them. I don't know if that has any validity or not, but that's what I wonder about sometimes.
It definitely holds true. I mean, there's definitely something to be said for sitting across from somebody and having that physical, sort of chemistry in the interview setting. And, you cannot replicate that certainly in a phone interview, and it's extremely hard to replicate it in a video setting. And, to kind of have that just comfortable chatter amongst a panel is very hard when you're stepping over each other in a video interview. So there's no doubt about it. I will say, there's some firms that have, and there's some trends that are out there that are working for firms. I mean, those firms that have managed to streamline their process, whether that's a condensed interview process or, the use of video discussions, they have taken that gut check that they need. They've perhaps put it on the shelf a little and they've applied a little trust to the process and said, hey, we're going to take a leap in some cases. And hopefully that's not a huge leap, but they have enough trust in their ability to evaluate somebody enough to be dangerous and impactful. And I think some other things that folks are doing, just to run through, because I was thinking through this, and publicizing their schedule is huge. And I don't just mean, here's our schedule with our PTO. I mean, genuinely delivering what your flexible options are going to be, not just during COVID, but post-COVID, and really, waving that banner as as something to be proud of. We're confident in our employees. We trust in our staff. We feel they can be productive. We want to set them up with the appropriate office working environment from their home if they choose to, and we'll embrace that. So, really publicizing that is huge. And then there's obviously the more tangible things. I mean, we're seeing sign-on bonuses start to return, some retention bonuses starting to come back. And then for the firms that can do it, and it's not the case in all firms, and certainly not the case in public accounting, but really well-defined bonus programs have been really, really helpful for those clients. And of course, the candidates that are evaluating them. Many folks, we got to understand, went through the last year and a half with no bonuses. Right. So incentive pay that's defined, that they can really see a light at the end of the tunnel and what they're working towards, extremely, extremely powerful.
So I think you mentioned some interesting things there. So I just want to kind of recap for the folks that are out there. You said sort of really, advertising what the schedule is going to be. Because a lot of us, that's a buzzword too right now, I think, is flexible options, right? So flexible work schedule, or, however we want to term it. I mean, those types of things, we've heard those terms for years, but really sort of advertising, like, what does that mean? And also, really clearly defined bonus structures. If there is a sign-on bonus, kind of putting that out there. So I think that all of those, I think, are pretty good tips, for folks that are looking for kind of what are people looking for. Because I think, and for me, this is, I come at it from an employer, kind of a perspective, I think, for the most part. Because a lot of our listeners, their employers, they're trying to figure out, how do I adapt? I mean, how do I adapt, and how do I actually find talent? Because it seems like the competition is picking up. It doesn't, it's not just the new environment. It's also just the race for talent has become just a lot more intense.
Yep, absolutely. And, and I'll definitely, zero in on that remote working culture, right? So flexible work is, I think a phrase, flexible schedule, we've heard for a while. Flexible scheduling, 10 years ago meant that I might be able to arrive to the office an hour later than everybody else, or leave an hour earlier.
Right.
And then over the last couple of years, maybe it's morphed into, I get every other Friday working from home. Right. Now flexible work means, how many days a week am I working home? And is there a chance that I could work fully remote? And to counter that, some firms are coming through with a solution and saying yes. And I think that changes the game for all firms. We have seen some, unique activity within the remote working culture, because as more and more firms are doing it, folks are still working long hours. Our accountants still have a close process to get through every month. And sometimes that bleeds into the off hours. So, we've seen firms come out with structured meeting times, no team meetings or video discussions outside of core working hours, right? We don't want to assume that just because your office is right down the hall from the kitchen, that you're going to be prepared to take a video call after dinner.
Right.
Selling the firm's success, working virtually in the past is a big one. I mean, it's not new territory for every firm now. So now you can talk about how successful it has gone over the last year. Of course, if it was successful, and you can sell on that, and that's huge.
I think all of those, I think, are good points. We did an episode of Accountable not too long ago where we were talking about remote management, and a person who my guest on that episode, he had been doing remote management for several years. He said, if you can't trust somebody, sort of, when they're from afar, you can't trust them in the office either. It was really like, people are either trustworthy and they're going to do their job or they're not. And I thought that was kind of an interesting perspective there, because I think a lot of people very much worry about, wanting to make sure that, that there's sort of clear lines on, expectations. And they think that people, when they're remote, that they're going to kind of take it easy. And I think, if anything, in a lot of cases, we've actually seen the opposite, that people actually work harder and they have trouble drawing those lines, to your point, between this is the working day, this is like my off time. Yeah, I'm still working from home, but that doesn't mean that I'm available 24 hours a day.
Absolutely. And to your earlier point, if you can't trust them, outside of the office, you can't trust them in the office. I would say, let's think about those accounting and finance, those accounting firm partners, right? At the partner level, this remote working scenario is probably going to highlight who your key managers are, who those that can hire, retain, train, mentor their staff remotely, and who are the others that can't and need to be plugged into kind of an in-office micromanagement setting. Yeah. And there's going to be a separation between those. And I'm going to guess that those folks who do a great job leading, mentoring, training, and coaching up folks remotely, they're probably going to thrive.
Yeah. Let's talk about kind of how firms can sort of, maybe there's things that they can do to kind of maybe take advantage of this time, and maybe some things that they do that they can do maybe to just hire the best people right now, because it is a little bit tricky. It's a little bit different right now. Smaller firms have always struggled to compete for talent, especially in, finance and accounting. I think that's fair in saying. They've always kind of struggled to compete. Are there things that they can offer? And you've already said a few of them. You've talked about kind of sort of being really upfront about what sort of flexible schedule means. But, coming from primarily small firms, if I try to outspend, the big firm down the street, that is never going to happen. You know what I mean? I worked for startups. We didn't have gigantic budgets. If, somebody wanted to compete against us, who was a lot bigger, a lot more established, they were going to win if we went at them dollar for dollar. Is there things that I can offer talent as a smaller business that, that might help me compete a little bit better?
Yeah, and you started it out with talking about advertising that flex work. Again, not to beat that drum, but don't tiptoe around what your working environment is going to look like for the long term. Okay. I have it. Document it when you can. Be prepared to advertise that in black and white, right alongside your other benefits that in the benefits overview that you provide to a potential employee, and certainly don't be vague about it when, Joe or Sally, who's been working with you for 5 years, walks in and asks you, what's this going to look like 6-12 months from now? Because, those are the folks that ultimately are going to cause maybe even a bigger problem for you during this great resignation. Because if you can't retain your current staff, hiring new staff is going to be doubly challenging.
It's going to be rough. Yeah. Yeah. Do people still, I guess they do. I guess that's kind of what you're saying. But I wondered too, for a while, if people are still really valuing flexible work, right? That used to be a unique thing. That's not that unique anymore, Well,
I think that it's still unique for the firms that really own it, right? If you're confident in your ability to work, and let's also unpack that term flexible work for a second. I think we still are talking about this migration from a day every other week or flexible scheduling, come and go as you please, to now 2 or 3 days out or more. And there's going to be, I think, some clear separation between those firms that are truly offering flexible, fully remote option versus those that are pulling folks into the office 2 or 3 days a week.
Right.
And I would tell those smaller firms, if it's not required, and if you don't really need it to get the work over the finish line, I'd strongly consider that full remote option. We've had a handful of clients that have embraced that. And I tell you, the immediate benefit you've opened up your recruiting and your talent pool astronomically. You
Right,
know, in
sure.
some cases, if you can deal with the time zone differential, you essentially have the entire country
Yeah.
at your disposal to recruit from. And, you know, again, time zones a bit of a challenge, but but you're still going to get your work out of them. These are, these are folks that simply are willing to work remote because it helps to achieve what they want personally. And in return for you offering 100% remote gig, you might see some other benefits. Hiring somebody, for example, in a secondary or tertiary market. I'm here in DC. When you hire somebody in the DC area, you're going to pay a DC salary.
Yep.
But a
Right.
DC firm that all of a sudden can recruit in Dallas or recruit in another market outside of the area might see some substantial benefit in the comp expectations.
Right. Yeah, for sure. Plus, they wouldn't have to deal with that DC commute that everybody,
No doubt about
it. That everybody talks about. Those of you that are from the DC area, you know exactly what I mean. And those of you that aren't, you should go to DC really anytime. To experience that. Just kidding. DC is great. One of my favorite places, actually. Okay, so let's ask. Let me ask you something else here, because I wonder about the long-term effects here. So we're again right now it's interesting, but we're just coming off of the pandemic. I mean, in some ways, I would say we're still sort of in the pandemic. In some ways, okay.
Yeah.
So, I mean, this is still fresh. Okay, this is still fresh. What about sort of the long-lasting implications? Like, one of the things that I think about is, public accounting, rightly or wrongly, okay, has always had a little bit of a, it's always been rough for the first couple of years, okay, for folks that come into it, all right? The term that is thrown around the industry, again, not necessarily embracing this term, okay, but is churn and burn, okay? Churn and burn. So it's like I get a crop of, candidates in. Some of them are going to work, some of them are not, but I kind of know that every year I'm going to hire more than I think that are probably going to progress through, because there's going to be a certain segment of that group that they're not going to make it, because public accounting is hard, it's demanding, it's a lot of hours, and for somebody especially somebody who's coming straight out of school, it takes some getting used to, for sure. Does that change in light of kind of this Great Resignation? Is it something that changes? Does the mentality of the firm change, or is it one of those things where it's like, public accounting is what it is, and we got deadlines to meet, and we got clients to take care of, and so you just got to deal with it, or you got to do something else?
Yeah, I think my answer might be might be a little controversial to say, but I think, do you think the atmosphere is going to change? Yeah, absolutely, it's going to change. Not nearly as much as we're going to see on, say, the corporate accounting or finance side of the house, but at the end of the day, there are going to be those industries that require the bright and best talent, and some of that talent is based on what the credentials are on their paper, and to work for those firms, let's think law firms, investment banking, some professional services, certainly public accounting and management consulting. I mean, these are industries that are typically hiring that top 10 to 20%. And so while we might see a movement as a whole, I think you're always going to have a chunk of the population of the incoming employee space that is going to, be willing to roll up their sleeves and do some of that heavy lifting that we've always seen in those industries, work those long hours that we've always seen, because they still have, that let's not say that everybody else doesn't have drive, but they are career motivated more so than say the work-life balance that so many others might be yearning for.
Yeah. I don't know. I had a friend of mine one time tell me that he did not believe that there was such a thing as work-life balance. It's just, that was kind of just not really a thing for him. It was just like, I work and I try to do something I enjoy. So it kind of all just kind of goes, like this in my life. I don't know whether that's true or not, but I think that that's interesting. I mean, I mean, and I think that there has been statistically there's been a drop in the number of CPA candidates people that are taking the CPA exam. But I think what you're saying is that there's kind of probably always going to be kind of at least some group, because accounting, as a profession still shows no signs really of slowing down. I mean, people keep going into accounting. Accounting firms still are doing well, and if anything, I think in some ways, I think the accounting firms thrived, or at least as best they could during the pandemic, because people were looking for advice. I mean, the industry was doing well in a bad situation because people were looking to that and saying, holy cow, somebody makes sense out of this for me. And the accountants, the CPAs consistently get ranked as one of the highest, most trusted professions every single year. Okay. I think I read this past year that they were like number 5 or something like that in Gallup's poll. Nurses were number 1, in case anybody was wondering. But I mean, so there's kind of this core group that's going to continue to just kind of that will be willing to sort of take that chance, go into the industry, and do the work that's necessary.
Absolutely. I do want to. I don't want to give the public accounting partners out there a hall pass that they don't have to deal with any change. There's always going to be this contingent, because again, they've had a challenge recruiting, prior to the pandemic. They're going to have, They had a challenge, finding new staff during, and they're going to have a daunting challenge on the back end, especially with this idea of a Great Resignation looming. But I do think that there are ways that they can be progressive within their respective firm or the industry as a whole. I think this, what we've traditionally seen is the growth path, let's say for public accounting, let's think in the tax and audit side of the house anyway, 3 years as a staff, 3 years as a senior, 3 years as a manager. And, that if you weren't kind of meeting those milestones in those respective timelines, then you probably were, we're set for other things. But,
right.
For the firms that have started to embrace, and let me use a stereotype real quick, a millennial mindset, a candidate pool that is perhaps not as patient as the generation before, those folks, they're saying they're ready. They want to be recognized when they're ready. And the firms that are willing to recognize them, if that happens to be a year before some company timeline, then, those are probably going to be the firms that folks are flocking to. Right. And, if word gets out, even at let's say the college recruiting level, that, at a specific firm, Big Four or otherwise,
sure,
is willing to hire and promote ahead of some prescribed schedule, then, that's going to be a huge recruiting pool for that organization. And I think the industry could really benefit a lot from kind of revamping what these achievement milestones need to be to help somebody elevate in an organization.
I think that's well said. So are there long-term effects here? I mean, is this just kind of temporary, kind of temporary craziness, and then kind of this will die down and we'll kind of become a little bit more settled, or is this just kind of the recruiting, how we recruit, kind of post-pandemic, for years to come?
Yeah, I mentioned before, that there was already some of these trends or behaviors emerging, this desire to have some flexibility in the work schedule, and the argument that I can be as productive working from home as I do in the office. So I could certainly see that, this is going to be a huge chunk of the recruiting activity and where the focus is in years to come. Some of the other things, of course, we're going to see this interviewing virtually. I mean, that's another trend that was coming together pre-pandemic, the idea of virtual interviewing. And it was predominantly used before in gaining some momentum to minimize discrimination. The idea of virtual interviewing, phone interviewing candidates to a certain level in the organization to just lower the risk of any sort of discrimination in the process before we laid eyes on them or brought them into the office, so to speak. So, that coupled with the company's now success doing it, I think that virtual interviewing is here to stay. And it's going to be a way that firms can not only continue to reduce that discrimination, it's going to be a way that they can streamline their process and really stay in lockstep with some of the other progressive firms out there. Again, I can't say enough. I think we're going to come out of this. The long-term effect is going to be two real camps of employers. It's going to be those employers that have made the decision to perhaps hire nationally or regionally, at least, to work fully remote. And then it's going to be everybody else who has some sort of in-office play, is tied to their respective market. And what you may see then as a result of that is the employees are going to fall into one or two of those buckets as well. They're either someone that enjoys the working remote and can roll from position to position, having never actually gone to their office or met any of their colleagues in person. And then there's going to be those other folks that, also are tied to their market, maybe enjoy the face-to-face interaction, or in order to be competitive in their market, they're willing to work in the office.
And I think that that's well put. And just to be clear here, folks, all of you out there in accountable land that are listening here, I don't know that we're necessarily saying that one is better than the other. Okay, right? So I mean, so there is advantages. I mean, if you want to sort of build that into your culture, where it's like, hey, our folks are local. I could see that being a selling point, to somebody who really sort of craves that. Kind of sort of what we would call maybe a traditional office feel, that could be a positive thing for some folks. So I think that there's, while, kind of maybe being from afar, that there's some advantages to that. I think probably also, kind of having sort of a localized focus, there might be some advantages there too. Is that fair?
Absolutely. I think, two things to look at from that perspective is, yes, there's always going to be a contingent of the population that needs to get out of their house. Yeah. I'm sitting in an office today and I have the opportunity to work from home and the flexibility, even have the space in my house where I could, but I need that escape from the house. And, and so I choose to do that. I'm not alone in that. Right. But you have to understand when you're recruiting that you are likely limiting yourself to, one chunk of the population or another. That's the first one. And the second one, and this is maybe from an employee standpoint. And I think the message out there for, not for your leaders, but as much as their staff is, if you want to be competitive, consider being in that bucket that's willing to go in the office every day. Because that group is a lot smaller than it was a year ago. Yeah. Fair enough.
Well, we would be remiss if we didn't ask you to talk about your firm, and kind of what you guys do in the DC area, and then if folks want to get a hold of you, how would they do that?
Well, sure. Folks can certainly reach out, and they can reach out by phone or email. Certainly, you can visit us, our website, TalentSource360.com. My email, Corey at TalentSource360.com. And then on LinkedIn, it wouldn't be a good headhunter if I didn't have all my contact info out there. So they're welcome to find me on LinkedIn at Corey Edmonds. But about TalentSource360, I mean, I'm a recruiter of accounting and finance professionals. This is year 20 for me. About 6 years ago, I launched my firm, went out on my own, and have since taken on a couple of other partners in our effort to find accounting and finance talent for the firms really here in the DC area. We also don't know what the future holds as some of those firms start to recruit nationally. We all of a sudden are finding ourselves doing a bit of headhunting in other markets. But up until this point, I'd say the majority of our work is here in the DC and Mid-Atlantic. We do love the DC area, and we support just about every industry that's present here.
Yeah. Okay. Well, great. Well, Corey, thank you so much for being on the show today. I really appreciate it. I think that this is a great topic. I mean, for those of you out there that are listening, I mean, we're all going through this. Okay. So, and yeah, it's a weird time. We've said that a lot over the last year and a half, but I think especially as we're trying to get talent on board, we need to understand what's going on. And so hopefully this was helpful. I think Corey offers a great perspective here. So Corey, thanks so much for being on the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Thanks for listening to Accountable. Be sure to subscribe for more interviews and insights from today's business leaders. David Peters is a registered representative offering securities through Cetera Advisor Networks, LLC, member FINRA SIPC. Advisory services offered through Carroll Financial Associates, a registered investment advisor. Peters Tax Preparation, David Peters Financial, Carroll Financial, and Cetera Advisor Networks are not affiliated. He is located at 1657 West Broad Street, Unit 5, Richmond, Virginia, 23220, and can be reached at 804-332-1373. The views depicted in this material are for information purposes only and not necessarily those of Cetera. They should not be considered specific advice or recommendations for any individual.